Good
All the-
evening, everyone. Thank you for showing up. Tonight with us, we have a great storyteller, Broyd. Welcome, Graham.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, everybody, for showing up here today and supporting this small bookstore. And Graham, again, thank you. Before we continue, Graham,
Yes.
can you tell us more about you? Like, who's Graham?
Who's Graham? Well, first of all, I just wanted to say, I think what Bharat and Anita are doing here is fantastic.
Thank
and creating a community here.
you so much.
And anything I can do to help.
Thank you.
We found each other,
it.
and we're doing this, and I hope you have great success here.
Thank
So, who am I? I am English by birth, and been brought up in England, educated in England, and then I came to America, and then had my career in the United States, in New York. I was a banker. I was not a writer, and primarily in New York, also in London. I spent about 10 years of the last 40 years in London as well. And I live in Scarsdale, so I'm a local, author, which is how we found each other. And delighted to be here tonight.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. So, backpack, jacket, surfboard. What's the story behind it?
Yeah. So while I was at university in England, I won a scholarship to go study at the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C., which was a big deal, back then. 6 weeks, flight out and flight back, and enough for a cheap hotel. I was 20, so my decision was to sell my ticket to Washington, D.C., and buy one to Los Angeles, because I wanted to go surf on Malibu Beach. And I thought, I'll surf for a week. I had very poor knowledge of American geography, so I thought I would hitchhike across from LA to DC in a week, and study for 4 weeks and go home. And so the book is initially about that trip, which did not go as planned. And when I sat down to write it, I realized that some of those stories didn't join up, made no sense to me. So I went back last year, 2024, and revisited the places from 1980. And that generated new stories, completely new stories from last year, and also kind of a compare and contrast between America in 1980 and America in 2024. So that's the book.
Thank you.
Thank you. When the idea comes from, like, to write a book, because you did the stories, I mean,
Long time ago.
Yeah. This
Yeah.
idea comes.
So there's some writers here, right? So I was never a writer. My mother was an English teacher, which was a good thing. But I was never a writer.
That certainly helps.
But I had told the stories from that first trip in 1980. There were really about 20 stories that were pretty remarkable stories, even if I say so myself. And I told those stories for 40 years. And I retired last year. And a number of the people who I told those stories to had always said to me, time they'd heard 2 or 3 of them, they said, "Oh my goodness, you have to write that down." So my thought was, you know what? I will write those stories down. I will send them. No one's going to buy this book, right? I'm going to send them to 30 or 40 of my friends. Maybe 10 of them would actually read it. I know those friends; they're not book readers, right? 10 of them read it, and we'd have a good giggle. So that was my aspiration. I knew I wasn't a writer, but I thought I could, write it down and we'd be good to go.
Thank you, Graham. If you had to pick one scene that really captures the heart of the book, which one would it be?
One scene.
Why? One scene.
Well, I'm reading. I'm going to read a piece tonight. I'm going to cheat, right? So that's one of them. So I won't say anything more about that. But there's really two ends, two pieces of the book that I think of are the core components. I spent a night in Death Valley, and two friends of mine, when they read that chapter recently, they both commented to me that they weren't sure if I was going to survive. And then they caught themselves and said, hold on, he sent me the book. He must have survived, right? So that was a really difficult experience. And I learned in 2024 that the most likely situation on why I was left in Death Valley, I was hitchhiking, was, I'll put it like this, because it says it in the book, was that the person who picked me up with the intention of raping me and killing me and putting me in a hole in the desert where no one would find me. And I met some people from that area when I went back in 2024, and they heard my story about what happened in Death Valley, and they said, yep, that's what was happening. And they asked a very pertinent question of, so when you were crossing Death Valley, did anyone know where you were? My family, back in England, thought I was in Los Angeles surfing for a week and then hitchhiking across to Washington, D.C. I didn't have anyone else who could have put me within 1,000 miles of where I was. And I can assure you that sleeping a night in Death Valley is not to be encouraged because of the circumstances. So that was a bad end. And then, the joy at the end, it's a book of joy, really, is that when I first came to New York, and I won't tell the whole story now, but I was picked up by two people on the New York City subway. I had run out of money, literally. Was thinking sleeping out in New York City in 1980 probably was not a good idea. And they gave me their apartment for 5 days, the 5 days between the day I was arriving in New York and I was flying out from JFK to go home. They gave me that apartment, to someone they'd met 2 hours before on a subway in New York City, and gave me the key and told me to give the key to the lady downstairs before I went to the airport. So, we had it was a trip of extremes. It was a trip of extremes. Some people were trying to cut me into pieces, and other people, giving me unbelievable, generosity and welcome.
I remember when we talked together, you told me, talk to strangers.
Yeah, it's and I don't know how many people will read it, right? So, but I think, and I think resonated with both of you,
Yes.
right? As people new to the country. Big theme of the whole book is the consequences, the impact of engaging with strangers, right? People outside of your comfort zone, people outside of your immediate community, and outside of your age group, and what that can do for you in life. Right? I'll give my reading will bring it up, but it's a huge theme and very, very important.
You have a lot of experiences here.
I'm sure. I'm sure.
All right. What was your writing routine? Like, do you have some space, or do you want to be alone, or?
Yeah. So there were really two different parts to the writing routine. I sat down initially to write my stories. I knew my stories. I've been telling them for 40 years. And so that was actually really easy. And And when I've spoken to other writers, they're like, "Oh my God, that it's really difficult writing." I'm like, "Well, it wasn't for me." And so I would find I have some space, a room in the house that made me feel comfortable, and it would usually take me about 20 minutes to get in the mindset. I'd take myself back to 1980, and as soon as I got my mind back to 1980, I just bash it out. And it took about 6 weeks, probably writing 4 or 5 days a week, probably writing, 3 or 4 hours a day. That got my stories done because that was easy for me. I knew my stories. And as my editor eventually said, clearly you've been telling these stories for a while because they flow naturally, right? They have a start, a middle, and an end, right? And so that was helpful. But then I ended up with a major publishing house, and then I got editors. I got an editorial team, and that was a completely different experience than I imagined, right? So the writing piece then, I expected them to spell check me.
You're a banker. So.
Right, I'm a banker, right? That's what I thought what they would do. And what once a week, and so that just took time, right? You only have one meeting a week because they had other people they were working with. They would say, Graham, why don't you think about adding this? We like this piece. Tell us some more. There were prompts to discuss certain things. And so I would go away and do that. Again, I was very quick. It used to annoy them. They would say, try and get that done and get it to me the day before next week's meeting. So I have a chance to read what you've done. I'd finish the meeting. I'd think about what they'd said. I'd write something down in an hour. I'd edit it a couple of times and I'd send it in 2 hours after the meeting. And it actually annoyed them because I wasn't on their schedule like for another week. And so that was that process though, because of their schedule, took 6 months.
No.
It took 6 months, right? Weekly meetings. And as I was saying to someone before though, the only words, I think this is important, when you write a book, the only words in the whole book that are not mine, there was no editing where I'll write this for you. It's all mine. It was them just asking me to do things. It's actually the title. I was not allowed to use the title I wanted, and they came up with the title. But everything else there was my.
What was the title?
Yeah, so whenever I would tell my friends I'm going to write this book, it was always called "Welcome to America."
Yeah.
Welcome to, because that's what it was. It was my experiences being not only coming to America, but being welcomed, to America. And so I was passionate about that. And then they said, you can't do that. And they said, there's 5 other books called Welcome to America. Mm-hmm. There's a poem called Welcome to America. And there is a Prince song called Welcome to America. And the issue is copyright, but that's not the major issue. The major issue is Google search. So when you put in Welcome to America, my book would not come up, or eventually it would, but you would have missed it, right? It would come up 6th or 7th or 8th. And as I've learned, whenever I talk to people about the book and they hear about it the first time, I just say to them, just put in 4 words: backpack, jacket, surfboard, book. Because if you don't put book, you get a bunch of backpacks will come up on Amazon. But if you put those 4 words, it comes up everywhere instantly. And so that's the reason they changed the title.
All right. I like it, by the way. I like it.
That's a very good thing that you mentioned. It's really good to know for new authors.
Yes.
Stand out. Next question. What surprised you most while writing the book about the story or yourself?
Yeah. So the initial writing, not much. I knew my stories. I wrote them down. But the editor, who was wonderful, she was a professor of philosophy in a previous job at Vanderbilt University. So she, as I like to say, was a woman of substance. And she said, do you want people to read this book who don't know you, or do you just want to send this to friends? I said, I'd like other people to read it. She said, okay. She said, there's two things we need to do here. She said, it is very clear from reading these stories that these were very formative stories for who I became, in my life. And she said, I want to just draw that out a little bit because other people will take a lot from that. They'll be able to see themselves and see those experiences and find that useful. And then secondly, she said, you probably don't realize it because you're just telling stories. But as you tell stories from 1980 and 2024, there is a compare and contrast of America between those two different periods. And she said, we don't need to convert this into a comparison and contrast, but just when you've written your stories in 2024, just realize that's what you're doing so that other people can take their own lessons from it. So particularly to your question, I didn't realize how formative those experiences were. I had a great trip. I had funny stories to tell. I love telling the stories. And it really wasn't until I went through the editorial process, which became almost like therapy. Pretty cheap therapy. And realized the impact of the 7 weeks I spent in the United States on this trip had on who I became. And so it was a huge takeaway, for me. I was so happy telling my stories. Somebody said I missed it. And she would, the very first time she did it, she said, so at the end of chapter 3, you say, having told a story, well, that had a big impact on me. She said, are you going to tell us how and when and why? Like, oh, you want me to do that? Yes. Just a couple of paragraphs. She said, just add it on. And so then I had to transport myself back to how I felt and what I experienced in 1980. And then I had to think through in my life, how had that made me change the way I approached people, approached circumstances, dealt with, risk, dealt with life. And it was really eye-opening. I mean, it was really, as I say, it was the best therapy I could have had, which I got from writing my silly stories.
Thank you for sharing.
Thank you for sharing.
How did you get published?
Yeah.
This is like a lot of people will want to
it's
know.
Nirvana, right? Yeah. I had no expectation of ever getting a publisher. I was well known as a banker for being a terrible writer. And people, would never hold back from telling me how bad a writer I was. And so it's kind of an interesting kind of business story. So Forbes is my publisher. Forbes as in Forbes magazine, the business magazine. They actually had me on a list of people they tracked in social media because I had been a CEO of a bank in the United States. And their genre was taking books from, one of the things they did was taking books from former chief executives of large organizations who would write a book about how great they were as a chief executive, all the wonderful things they'd done as a chief executive, and the lessons people could learn in their business career, right? Exactly. Who's the world's greatest bookstore CEO, right? And you find that book in the airport and you buy it and go, oh, I better read this because I might learn something. It was Forbes' thing, right? So they had me on a list in case I ever wrote a book like that. I had no idea about this. So when I went back on my trip in 2024 to redo my trip in California, I was blogging that trip on Facebook, talking about writing this book. straight over their heads. They had no interest in a hitchhiking book across California. So I wrote in my blogs 12,000 words. I was writing a lot. One sentence late in that trip mentioned that I was also going to be writing a book later in time about my business career. Ping! Alert! Right? One sentence out of 12,000 words, it alerted them. So I got a note from them. Sorry, this is a long story, right? But so I got a note from them, which I assumed was spam, right? One of those spam marketing things, and from Forbes books. But I didn't delete it. I kind of put it in a file. And like a week later, I opened it and I read it, and I thought, well-written piece of spam. It was actually signed by the vice president of publishing of Forbes Books. So I looked him up, and yeah, it was him. I thought, okay, I'll take a call from him. So we had a telephone call, and he wanted to know about the business book I was going to be writing. And I said, well, I'm going to write that, but I said, I'm actually writing another book first. And they said, well, what's that book? I told them. And I said, they said, where are you with that book? And I said, well, I'm like 90% done, but I said, I haven't even spell checked it yet. And they said, well, tell you what, they said, just finish it up and send it in. Don't worry about spell checking it. He said, because it will tell us how you write. It'll give us a sense of your writing style, so that when you eventually write that business book, we'll have a sense of whether it's going to work or not. And I thought, wow, I could get a publisher for my business book. That would be fantastic. I better not send them my hitchhiking book because then they'll see how bad a writer I am and they'll never publish me. And so I thought, I better go and get some lessons and work on my writing style before I send them anything in. I thought, what the hell? I'll send it. So I finished it off quickly and I sent it in. And, it was one of two transformational moments I had in my writing time. They called me back and they said, we'd like to have a meeting, and a Zoom call. And there were 9 people on the call. And I was like, okay, that's kind of a little odd. After, we'd done a quick introduction, I said, who are all these other people? And they said, all these people are people who work at the publishing house who read, a piece, and in a couple of cases, all of your manuscript. It was just a manuscript at the time. And they said they wanted to come along and see the person who they can see off the page. And they said, clearly, you have a writing style where you talk in your own voice, write in your own voice. And so I was a little tentative. I had zero confidence in my writing ability. I almost felt like they were making fun of me. and I said to them, so is that a good thing? They said, oh, yes. They said particularly for nonfiction, biographical-based writing, that they said, this may be terrible for banking, but they said writing in your own voice is what it's all about. And they said, they're here because you have it. And so, we're very interested in your hitchhiking book. I'm like, wow, it was just unbelievable kind of moment. And for all intents and purposes, I felt like they gave me permission to write. I was writing my stories thinking I'm a terrible writer, but my friends will enjoy it. And then when they told me the way I wrote was good, that was like, oh, now you're never going to stop me. I'm going to be writing till the cows come home. So that was,
wow.
So that's how I got the publisher, and they were, they signed me up to a 3-book contract. And they have been 3-book contract.
Wow.
Yeah. And they still want that business book at the end. They've been very supportive, and it's been a great experience.
Double check your emails, guys.
Yeah.
Yes.
Do not put it on the side.
Really.
Thank you. That is an amazing story.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing it with us. The way I introduce you to everyone is like you're a great storyteller and you're proving it over and over again. So in our initial...
I would say, so it was very funny when I did my first book launch with people I knew. They said, yeah, you're a great storyteller, but they're all too long. And they said, the great thing about you becoming a writer is we can read the stories and we can put the book down. I always thought that was very funny. Someone said that.
And when we initially met, you told us that you had a camera on your trip.
Yes.
And you took exactly 24 photos from your original trip. How that helped you on laying down the story and writing the book?
Yeah. So I don't know if some of the younger people know what this is, but I had what's called a Kodak Instamatic. Camera about this big.
Probably the yellow one.
Yeah, correct. Correct. Right? And it had, at that time, I think it cost like £12, like, $20, right? That was a lot of money for me. And it had 24 photographs in it. My trip was very undisciplined. I went in all different places I shouldn't have gone. But actually, I turned out I was very disciplined about my photograph taking. So my first photograph was of Los Angeles Airport Control Tower, which is like a little building that looks like something out of Jetsons, right? From the airplane, day one. My last photograph was standing on Liberty Island with the World Trade Towers in the background, and which someone took of me with my camera. So it's a picture of me on my last day in America on that trip. So those 24 photographs sat in a photo album upstairs in my attic for 40 years. I knew they were there. I'd shown them to people from time to time. And when I decided I wanted to go and sit down and write these stories, brought them all out. Right? They were all in order. Right? And so they were really the signposts for the trip, across the country. And one of the, and I'll give you a sense of the book. I told you the first photograph and the last photograph. And I told you the story. I went to LA because I wanted to surf Malibu Beach. Most people know where Malibu Beach is. It's about, it's a little bit north of Los Angeles. It's about 30 miles north of Los Angeles, right? Before I then went across to Washington, D.C. So, where's the other photograph? That's just off Malibu Beach. My second and third photographs on the trip were of me at a bull ring in Tijuana, Mexico.
Good place.
And when I sat down to write the book, I knew I'd been in a bull ring in Tijuana, Mexico, which, by the way, is about 120 miles south of Los Angeles in a different country. I knew I'd been there. I was like, why was I in Tijuana, Mexico? And how did I get there, given I was trying to get from LA to Malibu? And so that was the prime driver of me going back in 2024. There were 2 or 3 other circumstances which just didn't make any sense to me, didn't match the photographs. I had to go back. And of course, what happened was I had a truly incredible new experience at a bull ring in Tijuana, Mexico.
I love this chapter, by the way.
Yeah. You can't make it up, right? You cannot make it up. And as a 66-year-old man, had that experience, and then realized as I was leaving Tijuana, Mexico, having had that experience, I still had absolutely no idea why I'd gone there in 1980. It remains unsolved. So, yeah. But the photographs, that was the map all the way across.
Thank you for sharing. And you went back in 2024. Were you trying to do a 2024 version of the same trip?
No, that's the right question, actually, because, and most people, a lot of people assume that I'm doing a compare and contrast. One trip in 1980, one trip in 2024, match them, compare. It's not what happened. I went in 2024, as I just said, because my photographs made no sense to me. It was an administrative trip, and my intent was to attempt to take the identical photograph from 1980, to get to the exact same spot, to take that photograph.
I like it, that one.
Yeah, it helps selling books. I want to take, the Pinto and the Surfboard. Go to the same spot, and if you go there, I was hoping what would happen. I go, oh, now I know why I was in Tijuana, Mexico, right? And that was my purpose. And it was not to do a compare and contrast. It was just to work out the photographs. And then new stories happened on this new trip. And again, when I started writing, I just wrote the stories. And then it was the editor who came out and said, actually, there's a comparison in here that you can't even see. You're telling stories that will allow other people to interpret them on the differences between the US in those two times.
Did you dress up same in 2002?
Well, again, it's a funny story in the book. I found that spot. I found that railing. I found that that rock that I'm standing on, and I found, I got the back. The new photograph is in the book.
Like golden shorts, right? Look golden, right?
It's white. There's a white shorts. Known as the white shorts photo. It's become quite famous with my friends, and the people who, when I was trying to find it, I didn't think I was there. I was trying to find a different spot from another photograph. It's in Yosemite National Park. I had 3 photographs from Yosemite. I was trying to find all of them. And I was trying to find one of the other spots. And I'd stopped and I was talking to this couple, and they said, that's not here. But you know what? This other photograph you're showing me on your phone, I think is like, 20 yards away. And Yosemite National Park is pretty big. A total coincidence, right? And it was. And then they said to me, you have to take your shirt off, which I didn't. All right. But they were like, you have to take your shirt off. They said it won't be the same photograph. But, there's certain things you don't do when you're 66 anymore.
Thank you for sharing.
Thank you for sharing, of course. And I just think it's worth mentioning that all of these 24 pictures on the book, they are in color, which is very rare to be printed that way.
Yeah.
So
the old ones and the new ones.
Moving on to the next question. You met a lot of strangers
Yes.
on your trip.
Yeah.
A lot of them nameless.
Yes.
And they had a big impact in the trip and maybe in your whole life.
Yeah.
Do you reflect on that? How that changed the way you act towards strangers?
Yep. It has. I wish I could say that throughout my life that I always had acted this way. I did on the trip, having written the book, and in hindsight, realized the kind of impact that strangers had on me. I do it much more frequently now. Welcome strangers.
Yeah. That's how we met.
Right. And maybe I did some of it, during my life. I wish I had done, more. Everyone's different. I'm an adventurous type. I'm a curious type. I'm kind of interested in a lot of different things. And you can't learn much by being in a narrow environment with a small group of people. And so, when I looked back at some of the events, there's literally 7 or 8 different people in this book who not only do I not know their names, I never knew their names, that did things for me that were enormously formative in hindsight on who I became as a person. And when I'd be interested this evening, actually, when I do my little reading, that at different events I do different readings, and all three ones that I've used include the impact of an individual on me, and I have struggled to get through it. Because I realize how important it was and how fortunate I was. But I'm a big proponent, right, of reaching outside of your comfort zone, meeting people, speaking to people that you wouldn't otherwise communicate with or spend time with, and that some of those people may have no interest in talking to you, but those that do, I've found have had great benefit to me.
We need to be more friendly. It's not usual for New Yorker, but we need to be more friendly.
Hey, two people on the New York subway, right? Changed my life.
Exactly. How those wild and crazy stories affect you and in your career?
Oh, well, a lot of ways. And I'll take this from what people would say about me. People would say that I cope very well in difficult and stressful circumstances. As I mentioned, I worked for a bank. Most of my early career, I worked on a trading floor, which is a very intense environment. A lot of noise, a lot of a risk, a lot that is moving very, very quickly. And I would always apparently be very calm. The worse it got, the more difficult it got, the calmer I got. It probably came from some of these experiences I was having. I was putting myself in some pretty radically dangerous situations, right? On this trip, almost every day, and managing them, right? As a 21-year-old, right? Again, right, on the way to Grand Canyon, I'll give you one quick example. On the way to Grand Canyon, I was picked up by an adult male.
A pit stop, right?
Hitchhiking. I was hitchhiking, right? And picked up by an adult male who wanted to take me back to his house and have sex with me. and his offer, funny, was he would do my laundry. and as you can tell, that was probably 3 weeks before, after that picture was taken. I actually have no recall of ever doing my laundry on this trip, and I was there for 7 weeks. So, my clothes were pretty dirty. I probably smelled pretty bad. But I found myself. I'm in his car, right, and his truck. Actually, I'm in his truck. He's like a 50-year-old male. I'm 21-year-old European. And he's hitting on me pretty heavy, and I have to work out, how am I going to deal with this without this becoming violent? I don't know if he's armed, right? And I'm on a highway, and I need to talk my way out of this situation and get out of here as quickly as I possibly can in a truck that's going 75 miles an hour on a highway. And so it's just one little, it's a little example, right? But there were 30 examples of,
you should manage yourself,
of dangerous situations I got myself into on that trip that, at that stage of my life, I think became very helpful, that when I faced other situations, it was like, oh, this is fine. No one's going to die, on a trading floor at a bank. No one's going to die.
Exactly.
You'll all be okay.
I'm not on a truck.
It's just a little money, don't worry about it, I think it really helped.
Makes sense.
And with it, right, generally managing risk, right, in a business. People are always scared of taking risks. In this store, right, you're taking risks, money you put down. And so again, on that trip, I did some pretty stupid things, but actually, I didn't do things that were really, really stupid. I knew there was a line, right? And I learned those lines,
Reasonable.
right? I learned those lines of where risk got out of hand and risk was worth taking to satisfy my needs on that trip, and really intense risks that I think helped me, manage as a risk manager at a bank for my life.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that. So, your stories, in a way, provide a time capsule of America
Yep.
in 1980. And in many of your chapters, you kind of reflect on your trip from 2024. So, would you like to share some of those experiences or views or the
Yeah.
differences you saw?
Yeah. So we're in a very a world that's very split on opinions at this moment. It's very difficult, to manage with, and so that was I was highly sensitized, as I was writing anything, to not lose 50% of potential, readership, in this country, and so I have very consciously, with the guidance of my wonderful editor, tried to write stories of my experience that people could take their own conclusions, from. Um, and so far, when I read the reviews, that's what's happening, which is great. You see people writing reviews that maybe I hadn't even thought of, right? But they've taken away from the book as their perception. Really big compare and contrast. There's lots of little ones, right? I go into Mexico, right? I go across the border. I meet with local Mexicans, and there's lots of, I'm in San Francisco, and when everyone in 1980 is wearing suits as they approach City Hall. There's a lot of different, but the big one is there's a prominent chapter. It's called The Capital of an Empire. And it's about my time in Washington, D.C. And I had read, as my university studies, the decline and fall of the Roman Empire before I went on my 1980 trip. So that book was resonating in my head when I went there in 1980, and resonated, even more strongly in 2024. And as I say, I think I'm probably comfortable in saying this. People read it, people take it away in certain ways. I studied. Eventually, I made it to the Library of Congress. Eventually, I made it to the Library of Congress. But I studied in the Library of Congress. It had a huge positive impact on me being in that city in 1980. And they built the scaffolding to hang Mike Pence directly outside the Library of Congress. And so, that is mentioned in the book as something that as a compare and contrast of 1980 and 2024.
Thank you.
Your first impression of America was really positive. You mentioned that in many places it was the landscaping, people, opportunity, the destiny. What was it?
Yeah, I mean, I think the important thing is all of that, right? There was a lot of people in this room who weren't born in America. I was not born in America, and I would never compare, for instance, Albania to England. But England was in a pretty bad place in 1980, and coming to America was something that I'd seen stuff on TV, right, which was really New York and California. And when I actually came and spent time in the United States, it blew me away. It completely blew me away. It was, 20 times better than my expectations and what I'd seen, on TV and in movies. and it was awe-inspiring. And in all the ways that you mentioned, what I could see, the geography, the landscape, the people I met, the way they did things, it was it was really a remarkable trip, and my very first review, someone wrote that that this was like a love letter to America, and a number of people have said that they really enjoyed reading it because they had forgotten how great a country America is, and that I had allowed them to experience, that again, which was, just wonderful, again, in the context of, I was just writing my stories.
Yeah.
But people really, really have enjoyed, that aspect of the book.
And thank you for sharing. The Queen Mary, one of my favorite chapters. You, let alone that you describe your experience traveling as a 21-year-old, but you also described your father's first trip to America. What made you incorporate that story in the book?
Yeah. So, for those people who are in this room who are observant, right, there are 4 banners in this room, right? There's the silly picture of me in my shorts, there's the book, there's the surfboard. They're all kind of yellow and bright and clearly from my hitchhiking trip. And then there's this. What the hell is that? Right? It's a gray, black and white picture of a lot of people. I don't know if you can see it back there. I'll bring it forward. Right? That's right. That's from the book as well. That's clearly not me hitchhiking. And so, to go straight to your question, I did not work out my father's war experiences until I went back on my trip in 2024, last year. He passed in 2019, but I didn't piece it all together until I was on my trip back in I had bits and pieces, right, of it. But the nature of that generation was they did not like to talk about their war experiences. Yeah. And so my father had given me very little. And I'll give you some snippets. I'll put in the context what that is. So my father was in a very famous British Air Force group called Bomber Command. And it was the elite bombing troop in the Second World War. It's what people know what, some things that Churchill said, right? So never has so much been owed by so many to so few, was about Bomber Command. And so we knew very little about his experiences in Bomber Command, except that he had trained to fly in Terrell, Texas, little town about an hour east of Dallas. Because you couldn't train to fly in England, the Germans would shoot you down. Wouldn't be very efficient. So they'd send you to America. And there was a Lend-Lease program where people who owned their own private airstrips, individuals who owned their own private airstrips, would lease them out so people could learn to fly on small planes, prop planes, before they then would be taken back to England to fly a Lancaster bomber, the biggest bomber in the British fleet at that time. And so we knew my father had trained there because that was a great experience, for him. But when I was on the trip in 1980, one of the visits I had was his school friend from England was in Long Beach, California. So when I went on that original trip, my father had told me, go and visit my school friend, Alec. He now lives in Long Beach, California. So I went to visit Alec, and he took me to see the Queen Mary. It's Los Angeles, effectively Long Beach. And I was like, why am I going to see the Queen Mary? I want to go to like Disney World. I want to go to Hollywood. Oh, well, I'm going to see some British ship. This makes no sense to me. I did it, and I was, respectful, and we had a nice time. And the next day, I moved on. It was just one day. And Alec, by the way, for context, my father had shared this with me. He shared a photograph of him. He left school at 15. He shared his school photograph from that year when he was in his final year. 21 school kids, 15 and 16-year-olds. Only 5 of those 21 made it to their 21st birthday at the end of the war. The other 16 were all killed in the war. And my father and Alec were 2 of those 5 survivors, and they always felt guilty for surviving in the war. So, when I went back in 2024, I went back to the Queen Mary because I had some more pieces to the story. One of those pieces was my daughter had found on a business trip a museum in Terrell, Texas, to the British Air Force Training School. My father had no idea it was there. It was a museum to all the British cadets who trained in this small town. And she went there, and on the walls of the museum were photographs of my father. And so eventually I went to visit the museum. And in 3 weeks, I'm going to do a book event at the museum. But when I went to the museum, I was shown around the museum by someone who had been a British cadet there during the war. And he said to me, "Do you know how your father got to Terrell, Texas?" I knew he'd trained there. I said, "How did he get?" He was in England, right? How did he get there? I'm like, I have no idea how he got there. He said he came on the Queen Mary. They took the highest end line cruise liner for 2,000 people, 2,000 clients, right? Was on the Queen Mary. They put 16,000 troops on it. And at the time, the Atlantic Ocean was dominated by German U-boats who would have loved to have sunk the signature Queen Mary and 16,000 British troops on it. So the only way that they could get across to America was to go due north, up the British coast, up the Scandinavian coast, up towards the Arctic, and down and pull into Halifax, Canada. My father, I found out at the museum, left on December 23rd, 1942, with 16,000 of his closest friends on this trip that took about 6 days. And it went up to the Arctic, and he was equipped with his Air Force fatigues. They would have 3 8-hour shifts, 8 hours under deck, 8 hours of sleep. He'd be working 8 hours, 8 hours of sleep, and 8 hours on deck every 24 hours for 6 days in the Arctic in December in your Air Force, woolen, jacket and pants. And so I had no idea. And so it wasn't as I went back in 2024, I'd forgotten that I met with Alec in 1980. And now I realized why he took me to the Queen Mary. He never said anything. He never said anything. As I say in the book, he obviously thought, he knew my father had come across on the Queen Mary. He assumed, like him, my father had survivor guilt and had not told me. But he knew that if he showed me then, at some point my father would tell me, and I would be happy that I'd seen the Queen Mary. So he showed it to me, and I didn't work that out till 2024.
This is
So,
Thank you. That's why I asked you that question.
Yeah.
So
it's a hitchhiking story, right? But it's a hitchhiking story that, goes off in a few little sidelines along the way.
all right. You already elaborated the editor, but What impact did the editor think on the book? Change something?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think I already mentioned that,
Yeah.
right? So she pulled out the formative piece, she pulled out the compare and contrast in a way that I hadn't thought of, right? And really, frankly, I think if I'd written my stories, I think my friends and my network would have had a good time reading those stories, and it would have stopped there. So I owe her a lot by her skill in prompting me to just write a little more, not a lot more, but a little more to bring those things out. And one of my joys, probably the biggest joy, is it's kind of sad when you become an author. I look at my reviews every night, initially the first few reviews in were for people I knew. Some of them would have odd names. I'm like, I know who that is. But now, 90% of them are from people I have never met. And in some cases from different countries all around the world, and who are taking things out of the book that weren't necessarily written specifically to be that way, but people have it's resonated with people in different ways. And then that's really been wonderful.
Yeah, for new author, if they are going to publish something, to know what to expect. That's
talking about the reviews, I think it's worth mentioning that the book was #1 new release for a couple of weeks on Amazon.
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah. It's just my original expectation was send it to 30 or 40 friends and hopefully 10 would read it. That literally was my expectation. And it only was released in the middle of August. And it's really been, every week has been a shock. I have 4, the way the bestseller list works, there's the New York Times one, which everyone aspires to. That's 100 books. There's about 4 million books published every year in the United States, right? You don't make the top 100, right? There's 15,000 books published every workday in the United States. 15,000 new different, think about that, right? I mean, it's a staggering number. And so, after 2 months, I have different genres on Amazon, right? So you have, Amazon fiction and nonfiction, and then on nonfiction, in my case, travel, memoirs and biographies, and humor are the 3 categories that I'm in. And then there's subcategories under that. So I've had, in the subcategories, I've had 4 #1s, and in one of the travel categories, I've been #1 since the first week of publication, which is just, just wild.
It's amazing. So getting back to the story, you lived out of a small backpack for 7 weeks.
Yep.
From bull rings in Tijuana, Mexico, to surfing, to hiking mountains, to Vegas casinos, to interviewing the senator in Congress, and dining out in New York. How all this worked out?
Yeah. So with unclean clothes, but one of the things that's kind of relevant for context for the book is the title. It's a backpack jacket, Surfboard, and so the jacket plays a big part. Thank you. Plays a big part in the book, because it was not a typical jacket. So, hitchhiking, some kind of, rain jacket or something. I had a smart wool jacket with lapels, and formal kind of jacket. As a 20-year-old, you go out if you were invited to a fancy dinner somewhere. In my backpack, it actually took up, about 20% of my backpack, because this is big. And it was, I lived out of that bag. I had nothing else. I lived out of that backpack. I had a tent on the top. It had a sleeping bag on the bottom, a water bottle on the side, and all my clothing for 7 weeks. was in that backpack, and it included, a jacket. And that jacket was really only brought out 3 times, and every one of those times was absolutely critical to the events. You asked earlier, and we're probably closing on the piece I'm going to read right in a moment, but I'll preface it by the fact that this crazy idiot hitchhiking around America, meant to be studying in the Library of Congress for 6 weeks. I ended up interviewing Senator Howard Baker in the Senate office building. He was a Senate Majority Leader at the time. I'll mention it in the reading. You needed to have a jacket for that meeting, so I did.
That's amazing.
At least you the jacket paid off.
A big
That
way.
20%
Yeah.
space.
It was worth it.
Okay, how was writing this book changed the way you see your own journey in life in general?
Yeah, so I mentioned the meeting with strangers. It was definitely it's definitely impacted me. The joy of writing, joy of sharing stories. As a banker, no one would have any reason to tell me about their writing experience. It is stunning to me. Now I have written and published a book. How many other people I bump into, right? Some in this room, right? Who have written, are writing, want to write. And there was no reason for anyone to share that information with me before. Now they do. And so that's been, I'm not sure if I'm the best example for most people.
You are.
But so that, that's been, really, really, pleasant, experience. And as I retired, I had no expectation beyond the 6 weeks to write down my silly stories of being a writer. And for all intents and purposes, it's not quite full time at this point, but I'd say at least 50% of my time is taken up writing or related to the book, right? Doing stuff like this and other stuff that I do around the book. So it's a whole new life that I've got, post-retirement, unexpected. I do run sometimes as well.
What message or feeling do you hope readers walk away with after reading Backpack, Jacket, Surfboard?
Yeah. So it was one of the questions I had in my book launch, and I hadn't thought about it. And what I answered then, I think was fortunate, because I think it was the right answer. One word: joy. Joy. Right. I want people to read the book and smile. Right. Feel good.
Thank you for sharing.
Feel good.
We have one last question
Yeah.
that I like to ask to every author. What if there's one advice you would give to aspiring writers?
Yeah.
What would that be?
Yeah, write it down. I don't know how, I don't know how many people like what I'm thinking of, I'm wanting, right? Do it. Do it. Just sit down and write it down. You don't have to get a publisher first. Oh my God, that's difficult. I was lucky, but for most people, it's almost impossible. And get it down. It's the worst that can happen. Share it with someone.
And don't think for reviews.
Right. And I would add one thing to that, right? Is again, this stuff people tell me, it's not really that I learned. My editor said she enjoyed working with me because I didn't let perfect get in the way of good. And I think that's for writers, that's a really important thing. I was not a writer. I just happened to write. And my nature was I'd finish a chapter. I'd be encouraged to edit a little something. I'd edit it. I wanted to get to the next chapter. Right? And I find most other writers are like, oh, I need to go back and change that. I need to go back and I need to do that. That's like, and I'm like, we did a second edition because we had some things we had to change. There was a couple of errors in there. They always said there would be. So, we sold out the first print almost. So we had to do a second one. And even then I was like, I have to read it a lot. I did the audiobook myself. And sometimes when I read the audiobook, I go, ooh, that's not really written very well. I thought, if I ever do a second edition, I need to change that. I haven't. I'm like, whatever. People seem to enjoy it. It's fine. I actually think that's a good attitude. Get it down, write it down, get it out there.
Thank you. Thank you
Thank you
again
so
for
much.
this beautiful conversation. Thank you, everybody, for showing up.
Thank you.
Now we're going to do the
Q&A or reading?
The Q&A first, and then we'll proceed with the reading.
Yeah.
And for anybody that is interested to get the book, you can get it at the counter, and Graham will sign it afterwards.
Anybody has a question?
If you were, this is a sort of a speculative question, I guess. If you were 20 years old today and you did the same trip in today's world where people look at, computer and got full information and you would have been you would know exactly where you were in the desert. People would have known you exactly where you were. You have full information everywhere you go. You don't necessarily need to get to people who just look something up. Do you think the kind of experience you had then, in terms of the way they impact your life?
You're not the first person to ask that question, and actually, I don't know if you're the daughter or yeah. So at my book launch, someone asked me basically that question, right? And my daughter was there, right? And so I answered, and then my daughter stood up and said, I want to answer it. She actually went on a hitchhiking trip equivalent, right? She's born and brought up in America, in Europe, with my strong encouragement. But to your point, you can't replicate that. Very different circumstances, right, today. So it wouldn't be hitchhiking for hitchhiking. You'd have to find different types of things that would put you out there, at risk, right? And in different ways than I were. Redoing a hitchhiking trip, you could not have the same experiences. I'm not sure if you stuck your thumb out on the side of a highway in America, if anyone even know what you were doing now. Made no sense to you. But the concept of letting someone go, I had great parents. I had wonderful parents who, I spoke to twice on 2 telephone calls in 7 weeks, for probably less than 2 minutes each time. Right, correct. Quarters in a phone. That's the only way to contact. So you can't replicate like for like, but the concept of allowing your child to stand on their own 2 feet, make their own experiences, unattached, with your full faith and support, right? Go find themselves. That can be replicated. What specifically that is in your family, in your situation, I don't know. But I think, that concept still exists, right? But in different ways. I don't know if that's helpful or not.
Anybody else? Question?
Thank you. Thank you very much. The conversation has been great. In 1980, traverse, I guess, the United States, did you find the character or the people that you met different in different parts of the country as you got to Washington, west from the middle East Coast? And now coming back in 2024, did you find the same character, people, or experience in some community, or was there something different that ended that bonding?
You should sit up here and do my next interview. Those are 2 wonderful prompting, questions. So coming from a small island, one of the most amazing things to me was the diversity of America. I was on the beaches in California. I was in the bull ring, let's call it North America, in Tijuana, Mexico. I was in San Francisco. I was in Yosemite National Park. and Grand Canyon. It's in Death Valley. It's in New Orleans, Preservation Hall, and on Bourbon Street. I was in Washington, D.C., and I was in New York City. And every one of those places was like a different country to me. I mean, from a standpoint of variety, not that it was separate from America, but then the variety of what the country had to offer. All of that, right? To me, coming from my little island, you know, in the British Isles. And so that was one of the huge takeaways I had. It's like, oh my goodness, just look at this country. Look at all these different things that make up one country. That was really striking. Take the second part of your question, right? So, and again, it goes a little differently than probably most people would anticipate. I'll tell a little bit of the Mexican story. So how different was it when I came back? And I can answer that lots of different ways. And I talked a little bit about Washington, D.C., earlier. But I went back to the bull ring in Tijuana, Mexico. And the area that the bull ring was in not only had a U.S. Tourist Department warning, do not, in any circumstances, go there. It had a Mexican state warning that said, you can go to Tijuana, but you do not go to this part of Tijuana. It is highly dangerous. Drug cartels, kidnapping, and just extreme poverty, and because it wasn't in the tourist areas of Tijuana. And I won't tell you the whole story. You have to read the book. But I continued on in my attempts to find the original bull ring and take the same photograph. And I ended up in one of the worst parts that you can imagine of Tijuana. But I found the bull ring. It was at the end of a street where the sewage was coming down the street and people were living under corrugated iron, roofs in their houses. And in the parking lot, out the front of the bull ring, there were two guys standing there who were looking at me with a look that said, what the hell are you doing here? And I approached them and I spoke to them. And one of those people was the son of the main matador of the bull ring from 1980. He was a famous Spanish matador, his father, who the bull ring back in 1980 was named after. And his son had decided that bull ring had been demolished about 15 years ago. And his son was building a new one in his father's honor to reestablish bullfighting in Tijuana, Mexico. It was due to open in June of last year. I was there in April last year. And one of those two people was his son. I showed him a photograph on my iPhone of the original bull ring. And of course, his eyes lit up. He said, I know that bull ring. That was when my father was the matador. And so my experience in going back to the United States was, if you still put yourself a little bit out there, 66 years of age, in a rental car, if you still put yourself out there, good things can still happen. If you engage with people, right, take a little risk. I was pretty sensitive to my circumstances. My antenna were up. I ended up having brunch with his family inside the bull ring. And he showed me around, and I met with 12 people, his friends and family, who were working there and helping finish off the bull ring before it opened. And they all, greeted me and spent time with me in my broken Spanish. And before I left to come back. And so, in 2024, good things are still out there. Thank you for asking those two questions, right?
Thank you.
I think you'll enjoy the book.
Anyone else? That's all. Graham, do you want to read some pages?
Are you? I'm always sensitive to too much of me.
Just a little bit, like
yeah. I've got, it's a short story.
all right.
It'll take about 6 or 7 minutes, if that's okay.
Totally.
Hold on a second. Let's just find my right spot here and set up. So just to set the scene, right? You know the original story. I'm meant to be studying in the Library of Congress for 6 weeks. And so I'm now arriving in Washington, D.C., late in my trip. And then, I'm studying, the study I'm meant to be doing is on the Panama Canal treaties. Kind of timely. That was what I was on my scholarship to study. So the section title is Jake, the Australian Journalist. I booked into a youth hostel in Washington, D.C., within a mile or so of the Capitol buildings. I was stressing about how quickly I could get into the Library of Congress and how much reading and note-taking and subject assimilation I would have to do in such a short time. It was late afternoon. I had a bottle of beer in my hand and was in animated conversation with an Australian fellow traveler in the hostel, a rugged-looking guy with messy, curly, light brown hair and a small, unkempt beard. He wore a light-colored patterned shirt and khakis, probably in his late 20s. His name was Jake. We were sharing our stories. Jake was a freelance journalist, apparently not doing that well. He was staying in a youth hostel. But hey, as far as I was concerned, he was the most famous and talented Australian journalist I had ever met. Jake had a pretty good knowledge and understanding of the U.S. Panama Canal treaties. As an Australian covering the U.S. in Washington, D.C., he had an excellent detailed knowledge of international affairs. Jake was genuinely interested in the subject of my research and immensely amused that I had only 6 days left before my flight back to London from Dulles Airport and had not even started my studies. He roared with laughter about that. A few beers made my situation ever funnier to him. Engaging in my hopeless plight, he advised, "You should call Senator Howard Baker." Calling Senator Howard Baker. Senator Baker, the Republican senator from Tennessee, had been the Republican Party leader in the Senate since 1977. Baker had run against Reagan for the Republican presidential nomination earlier in 1980, but had pulled out after the Iowa caucuses at the end of January. Baker was well known for his support of the Panama Canal treaties. That support had hurt him in the Republican primaries. The canal treaties were driven by the Democratic Party and its leader, President Carter. But Carter could not pass the legislation for the new treaties without getting some Republican votes in Congress. His route to getting those votes was through Howard Baker. This process went by the name of bipartisanship, a novel idea. After President Carter, Howard Baker was the most important individual in U.S. politics to speak to about the Panama Canal treaties. President Carter's leadership and Howard Baker's role and reputation as the great conciliator in the Senate were the two critical components in getting the treaties approved. Jake's thought process was that President Carter was not available. Jake knew he was traveling somewhere overseas, so I should call Howard Baker. Picture me in a youth hostel, in dirty jeans. I probably smelled a little ripe by then as well. I was British, as in not American, 21 years of age. It was my first evening in the capital of the United States, and I had already downed several beers. This proposal for me to call the Senate leader and recent U.S. presidential candidate sounded as stupid an idea to me at the time as it probably does to you reading this book. Jake was relentless. He said he had Baker's office number somewhere, and after some rummaging around, he produced a small, worn, classic journalist's address book with a black cover. He leafed through it and declared, "Here it is, Senator Howard Baker's phone number." 2, 3, 4 times he tried to persuade me to call. Each time I considered the idea ever more ridiculous. Eventually, I relented to his persistence and agreed. Jake and I thought through what I should say. We gathered up as many quarters as we could find. We waited in line to use the single wall-mounted phone at the hostel. We plugged in the quarters, dialed the numbers, and waited. Even though it was late, someone in Baker's office answered my call. A man who sounded like a young staff member. That was a shock in itself. I plowed in a few more quarters, rapidly told him who I was and what I was doing in Washington, my study thesis on the Panama Canal treaties, and the important role played by Senator Howard Baker, and asked him if there was any chance that I could meet the senator and interview him. I already knew the answer, but I had to ask. It would satisfy Jake, at least. Senator Baker is in town, advised the voice. Another surprise. It was August, and senators were usually on vacation or at a minimum with their constituencies in the summer months. He has a full schedule tomorrow, but if you are willing to come to his office and wait, and that could be for a long time, there's always a possibility something gets canceled and he can squeeze you in. I cannot guarantee anything. We exchanged some details: Senate leader's office, Senate office buildings, Constitutional Avenue, up the stairs, turn right. The senator would not be in until 10 o'clock, but would probably be there until after 6. Jake smiled. I was in shock. How the hell was I going to pull this off? The interview. Preparation started immediately. I had a jacket, the same one I used in Vegas. It was a little rumpled, but I could hang it off the end of the bed overnight. My only long pants were my jeans. Those white shorts were not going to work for this meeting. I washed my jeans in the sink with some soap and hung them out to dry. I planned to schedule a shower first thing in the morning. I borrowed a yellow legal pad from Jake and started writing out questions for the senator. Pages of them. By the morning, I felt pretty good. My jeans had never looked better. I had a collared blue shirt and my jacket, and I had banged the dust out of my running shoes. I had run all my questions for Senator Baker through my head 100 times throughout the night. Of course, I knew I would never actually get to meet or interview Senator Howard Baker. That was obvious. But telling my professor that I went to the Senate office building and almost met Senator Howard Baker, maybe saw him pass by in the corridor, and that I spoke to one of his assistants on the phone had to be worth something. An A for effort and initiative, if not for the content of my work. I made my way to Senator Baker's office. I was greeted on arrival by the young staff member who I had spoken to on the phone. Cran Montgomery, he introduced himself. He looked in his late 20s, very tall, all-American looking to my eyes, an eager beaver, but totally delightful, quiet, friendly, and welcoming. I think he was slightly amused by my story and circumstances, and probably my outfit, but he worked in politics, so any negative thoughts were not going to be in evidence. He showed me to a seat in a very nice waiting area not far from the entrance to Senator Baker's personal office. There were 3 or 4 very comfortable chairs, some magazines, very high ceilings, very thick walls. I settled in for what I expected to be the whole day. I would lose yet another day of studying, but this had to be worth the sacrifice. After a few hours, Cran popped over. The senator has had a cancellation. He will see you in a few moments. You will have 20 minutes to speak with him. He is very strict on his schedule. A kaleidoscope of butterflies took off in my stomach. Head spun a little. I stood up. Deep breaths. Cran opened the door. In I went. Me and Senator Howard Baker. I surveyed my situation. The office was very long. At one end, a huge mahogany desk, a very important-looking man sitting behind it, a brown, shag-piled carpet, some images you just never forget, and a big clock on the wall that had additional arms on it to note 20-minute intervals. It looked like the office of a Senate Republican leader, extremely imposing. Senator Baker stood up and came around his desk and greeted me like a long-lost cousin from the Tennessee mountains. He had been advised that I was there to interview him about the Panama Canal treaties. He shared with me that he would do his best to answer all my questions, but that he only had 20 minutes. He smiled. It was a politician's smile, one that just draws you in and comforts you, as he introduced me to the seat I was to sit in. I crossed my legs, pulled out my pen from my jacket pocket, and looked down at my yellow legal pad and all my prepared questions. I knew most of them by heart by now, so I just launched in. For 20 minutes, I relentlessly asked what I thought were pertinent and relevant questions, without any real hesitation, and he answered them with candor and personality. How strong was the U.S. negotiating position, given the canal was built on Panama land? As my time ran out, he got up and walked towards me with his hand outstretched to shake mine. He thanked me for coming to visit. Think about that for a moment. He thanked me for coming to visit. He wished me luck with my research and papers. He wanted to ensure that I'd send him a copy of my work once completed. He wished me well. The whole situation was outrageous. I was not an American. I could not vote in the U.S. elections. I was not from the state of Tennessee. I was not a publishing journalist. I was a kid, a young Brit, in jeans that were still a little damp from being washed the night before. The Panama Canal Treaty subject had probably cost Senator Baker his chance at being President Reagan's vice president in that year's elections, which of course Reagan would win in a landslide in November. He took the meeting, he answered my questions, and he treated me as if this was his most important meeting of the day. Wow. And I'm going to read a little bit from further on because it's relevant to what we talked about today. Thank you, Jake, the journalist from Australia. Jake was gone when I returned to the youth hostel. He had given me Senator Baker's phone number, but never his own. He was just a passing helper on my journey. He probably changed my life. He helped me out of a sense of fun and possibly in support of the underdog journalist that maybe he was and thought I should be. I never saw him or spoke to him again. But he is see, I always had trouble getting through this. He is branded in my memory for life. I hope I have done favors for others with absolutely no benefit to myself in his honor.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing the evening.
Whoever
Pleasure.
wants the book and sign, we're going to sit right there. So we're going to do the signing. Thank you so much. It was a great. Thank you so much.
I always have trouble reading it. I still